Hi, I'm Nicole Dyer from Family Locket Genealogists, and I'm excited to share with you a presentation about the Research Like a Pro with DNA online course called Find and Confirm Ancestors with DNA Evidence. In the beginning of our company, my mother, Diana, wrote the book Research Like a Pro. Later, we worked with Robin to come up with the Research Like a Pro process that would apply to using DNA evidence. So that book is now available in ebook and paperback. We then decided to make that book into an online course and a study group. So today I'll show you what the process for the course is like, so you can decide if you're interested in joining it. So at Family Locket, you can access all the lessons where you watch videos and do readings, and there's quizzes. So there's one kind of page for all of the lessons, and after it's done you'll see a check mark next to it, and you can click on the videos right there and watch the lectures. Then you can click on the next topic and view more. So I'm going to take you through what each lesson is like and give you some examples of how I did that lesson in our very first Research Like a Pro with DNA study group. So in lesson 1, you assess your DNA matches and analyze your pedigree. And the task for this lesson is to review your pedigree and write about 2 or 3 brick walls that could be overcome with DNA. And then assess your close matches. This just means going and looking at your close matches at each company's website and seeing how much DNA they share with you, and try to figure out who the common ancestor is with them if they have a tree. And so you can take notes about what you find out on each company's website. They have note features. And then if you can't figure out how you're related to some of those close matches, you contact them for more information and keep track of what you're doing in a correspondence log. Another part of this lesson is a basic clustering or leads method to help you separate your matches into clusters or genetic networks using the leads method, colored dots, or another method. So I had a research question in my pedigree analysis for my husband's side of the family, and that was, who were the parents of my father-in-law's second great-grandfather, John Robert Dyer? So throughout this little session today, I'll be talking about this Dyer project, and this was one of the first projects that I did in the Research Like a Pro with DNA course. So after I figured out that research question by my pedigree analysis, I then worked on assessing some matches. Previously, I had done a lot of documentary research on John Robert Dyer, and I had organized his matches in Ancestry with the colored dots, so I had kind of separated them into clusters. And then during this lesson, some of the new work I did was really focusing on contacting matches in the other companies that I hadn't done before, 23andMe, GEDmatch, and Family Tree DNA. And I worked on analyzing some of his Y-DNA matches and noticing the likelihood of a common ancestor within a certain number of generations, as shown in this chart. Lesson 2 of the Research Like a Pro with DNA course is to organize your DNA results and create a research objective. So I worked on diagramming the close matches. You can use Lucidchart or diagrams.net, and then you're supposed to write 2 or 3 possible research objectives and then choose one. So over here on the right is an example of a Lucidchart diagram showing some of the close matches on my mom's side. When I did this lesson on my Dyer project, I found a lot of matches to Robert that are on the Dyer side that went back to the Dyer ancestors, and I made this in Lucidchart. I also, when I was doing this, noticed there were several people in his generation who could have relevant DNA. So I asked a lot of them to share their DNA match list with me and upload to GEDmatch, so I would have more data to work with. And then in order to help me stay organized, which is part of this lesson, I worked on creating a Dyer DNA research tree at Ancestry to build trees for my matches. So this lesson is a lot about diagrams and family trees and how that can help you stay organized. And then I wrote 2 research objectives, and you don't need to for the course, but it's helpful to have an extra one in case your first one doesn't work out. and you decide to switch objectives during the course. And it's good practice. So here's the one I wrote about John Robert Dyer. The objective of this research project is to use autosomal DNA and genealogy research to find the parents of John Robert Dyer, born 1813 in Tennessee or North Carolina, married Bathsheba Tharp, and died in Hawkins County, Tennessee in 1879. Then I bulleted the reasons why I chose this objective, the fact that I have enough DNA to work with, and there are many matches in this line, and it's not too far back in his pedigree, so it'll be possible to solve with DNA. In the next lesson, the focus is on creating timelines, source citations, and file organization. And the task for this lesson is to create a timeline with sources found in the previous research. So kind of gathering together all the research you have done in the past. And then to practice making source citations for those documents in your timeline. And so you'll write citations for your timeline, and then you'll also kind of create a list of some templates of citations that you could possibly use in the future. Just copying and pasting those timelines you've made, or those citations you've made, into a document or a spreadsheet of a bunch of citations you could use in the future. And then another thing to focus on in this assignment is to set a protocol for saving electronic documents in folders. So when you're gathering all your previous research, you can save those into organized file folders in your computer. So for my Dyer project in this lesson, I reviewed a lot of the documentary research I had done in a previous project, and in that last report, I had some findings that I hadn't added to my old timeline. So I updated my timeline from the recent report, noticed some fan club names that might be helpful, and then I practiced making citations for ancestry trees, since I was looking at a lot of those for DNA matches, and added that to my citation templates list. In lesson 4, you can analyze your sources and your DNA matches. So I looked at my timeline, and you can see in this screenshot of my timeline here that I analyzed the source, information, and evidence to see what I had as far as strength of information. A lot was secondary and undetermined, so I probably need some more primary information. I also added DNA matches to my diagram that was focused on the objective, and really focused on finding matches that would be helpful. And I also noticed that Robert's patrilineal line, who was my key test taker, my father-in-law, he had matches confirming his patrilineal line back to the research subject, which was John Robert Dyer. So that was helpful, setting a strong foundation for the project. And I also evaluated a lot of the ancestry trees in this cluster of matches going further back from John Robert Dyer, and found that a lot of them, of course, they're all authored sources, and they were pretty convoluted and didn't always agree, a lot of conflicting evidence, so realized I needed some better documentary work on those trees. In lesson 5, this lesson you work on locality research and ethnicity, and so you choose a place and a time period that might have answers to your research question, and then you create a locality guide to help you know what's out there to search. And you also can review ethnicity estimates and locations that are showing up in the DNA matches. For my Dyer project for this lesson, I had a Hawkins County, Tennessee guide that I had made in the past. I reviewed that, but then I created a new guide for Granger County, Tennessee, where I noticed a lot of the matches who were shared matches with my Dyer DNA matches had ancestors from Granger who had the surname Dyer. So I was pretty interested in researching more about them. And then I reviewed hints from Robert's ethnicity estimates, but didn't find anything super helpful there. Lesson 6 is about exploring DNA tools and methodology. This is a chance to experiment with DNA tools that you maybe haven't tried yet, and write in your reflection journal about how the tool might help you with your research objective. This is a bell curve that Robin Worthland made for us to decide which tool might be helpful. And at the beginning of a research project, that you haven't worked on before, you should start at the left. If you've been working on this project for several phases of research, then you can work on some of these harder ones at the right as a general rule. In my Dyer project for lesson 6, I worked on the Genetic Affairs AutoCluster tool and worked on the Collins-Leeds method of autoclustering for DNA GEDCOM, and tried out the DNA GEDCOM website surnames list. And then I worked on gathering more match lists with the DNA GEDCOM client. And the DNA GEDCOM client helps you get match lists and in common with lists that you can use for future tools. So I tried out all these tools and got a little more familiar with them and just tried to take notes in my reflection journal of what I learned. Then lesson 7 is where you make a research plan. You choose the DNA methods that you want to use and you write about your prioritized strategy. So these are all the steps for a research plan that you can do. Then in my research plan for the Dyer project, I really focused on creating a hypothesis and planning searches that might help me accept or reject that hypothesis. So my hypothesis was that there was some Dyers in Granger, Tennessee that were possibly the grandparents of John Robert Dyer. And I planned some searches in documents that might help me. First, I wanted to do ancestral research for Bathsheba, John's wife, to separate her side of the family out and be able to know, are some of these matches I'm seeing going back to her side of the family, and just be able to separate those out. And then I wanted to do some probate research in Granger, Tennessee for James Monroe Dyer, who was a name I had seen in the family trees of some of the matches. Then my planned DNA analysis was to make a matrix of DNA matches with Robert, his siblings, and his cousins who had shared their match lists with me, and then cluster the match lists of Robert's brothers with the Collins-Leeds method to find new relevant matches. In lesson 8, you can follow your plan and do research logging and writing as you go. And this is where you can record the results of your searches in an Airtable research log or an Excel spreadsheet, and then transcribe and abstract from the documents as you go. You can also evaluate the documents and decide if you need to change your plan. And so when I did lesson 8, I logged many searches, and I was able to separate out Bathsheba Tharp's side. And I had a little change of plan when I learned about Connected DNA offering to create network graphs for several people's matches. So I wanted to take Robert and his 2 brothers, who I recently got all of their results back, the 2 brothers at least, from Ancestry, and I wanted her to create a network graph that shows clusters of matches for all 3 brothers. And when she did this, I found this blue cluster at the top that was closely connected to John Robert Dyer's descendants in the pink cluster. And so I focused on this new cluster and found that it led to a Taylor family of North Carolina and Kentucky. So I kind of realized, research plans are flexible. So I went down this new path with a new hypothesis that the ancestors of this blue cluster were probably one of the parents or grandparents of John Robert Dyer. So I wrote notes to use in my report and went forward with this new hypothesis. Lesson 9 is all about correlating your findings and writing your research report. And you can start by writing an outline, then you write your first draft of the report and make note of any future research suggestions. When I wrote my report for the John Robert Dyer objective, I discussed the findings that I had found for separating out Bathsheba Tharp's side of the family, and then I talked about the correlation of new findings from the network graph with family lore about Sarah Taylor. I realized there was a story that John Robert Dyer's mother could have been Sarah Taylor, which went along with that blue cluster, who were all the Taylor matches. Then I discussed the pedigree collapse because Sarah Taylor appeared to have married her first cousin, Robert Dougherty. Then I outlined the next steps in Y-DNA targeted testing that I thought I maybe could do in the future. Lesson 10 is about finishing your research report, publishing, privacy, and copyright. And this is where you can review any copyright considerations in your report if you've used copyright materials that you need to get permission for. And if you were able to get any peer feedback by sharing in the Facebook group, or if you're in the Research Like a Pro DNA study group, then you have peer review. If you're taking this course independent study, then you can share it with other people in the course through the Facebook group, or by sending it to myself, Robin, or Diana, and we can edit it for you and give you feedback. And then after you get the feedback, you can add finishing touches to your report, and then write in your reflection journal about how you might share the report in the future and how you might want to make it private if you need to, because DNA matches should be kept private. Lesson 11 is about productivity and further DNA education. And for this assignment, you write in your reflection journal about your project and how it went and what you might do better to become more efficient in your research process. You can also create an education plan for future goals and think of some ideas for how to become more productive, which we discuss in the lesson. Go to FamilyLocket.com/shop and then choose eCourse to register.